Nitro Rush begins with a flashback event about a celebration carried out by a group of people on top of a building while consuming a prohibited drug called Nitro Rush. Illegal drugs can make users hallucinate. They think that they have a pair of wings to fly. So, one by one, they jump from the top of the building with a happy feeling. In the next scene, a male prisoner named Max exercises to train his muscles in prison. After that, he stopped and sat looking at his son's photo when he was little. Then a cop told him that his father had come to visit him. Max immediately went to the room where his father was. When he meets his father, Meg, he gives Max a birthday present in the form of a book and a recent photo of his son, Theo. He said that recently Theo had not been home and had not given any news to him either. In the afternoon, Max was closing his eyes while remembering his memories with his family. Suddenly another prisoners come and disturb him. He immediately beat them until they gave up. On the other hand, two young hackers, Charlie and Theo, observe the movements of scientists conducting research. They are hacking an illegal laboratory site, but their activities have been known by the police because they also commit online fraud. The following day, news of their arrest was on the morning news. According to the news, the police only arrested a man named Avocat, who was their boss. Meanwhile, Theo and Charlie were released with special supervision because they were both still teenagers. Meg, who was making a cup of coffee, accidentally saw the news on television. He immediately came to the police station to free Theo. When they got home, he scolded him and gave him advice. But Theo didn't care about all of his words. Theo said that what he did was not as bad as his father's because he had been in prison for decades. He immediately entered the room and slammed the door. After a while in the room, Theo felt uncomfortable and chose to escape through the window to where he worked. At the same time, Max, who was in prison, was called by a police officer. He was asked to meet someone in the upper room. He immediately went there handcuffed and sat waiting for the man. Not long after, a woman who was the director of the police arrived. She pulled out a photo of a man named Avocat. Max also recognized him. He was the man who had sold illegal hearts to Max's wife. But his wife's heart operation failed, and she died. Then she took out a liquid in a bottle from a box. The liquid was a new type of prohibited substance called Nitro Rush. If someone consumes the drug, that person will go crazy and fantasize about having wings. The distribution of this case is still under wraps, but the police suspect the involvement of Avocat and his men in the distribution. Now the police are looking for the person who made the Nitro Rush because Avocat has been arrested and is in prison here. Hearing that, Max had no interest in helping her. But she said that his son, Theo, had joined Avocat's crew. She showed him the photo of Theo's arrest. Finally, he agreed to help them. Max was emotional when he heard the news and immediately went to find Avocat, who was in the same prison as him. After he met Avocat, he immediately hit Avocat and a man who was his subordinate. He also threatens Avocat that if he still wants to live, then don't involve his son in illegal work. A man who served as a police officer immediately came to intervene in them, but he was instead made a hostage by Max so he could escape from prison. Max, who tried to escape, was immediately chased by several police officers. He managed to escape through the roof of the building by jumping. When Max arrives outside the prison building, he encounters a policeman driving a car and pointing a gun at him. He immediately grabbed the gun from the policeman and took his car to escape. After that, he immediately went to his father's house to meet Theo. Arriving at home, he immediately asked his father where Theo was. But when they searched for him in Theo's room, he wasn't there either. The following day, his father drove Max to where Theo worked. Once there, he tried to look around the building. Then a black car stopped there, and a woman got out of the car with Theo and one of his friends. They immediately entered the building. Max tried to enter the place, but suddenly one of them opened the building door so that he was caught. He also knows that Max is a criminal. Max was prevented by a man named Collis from going there. Collis forbade him to enter because he feared the police would follow him from behind. Max did not give up. He tried to enter through the back door, but he was caught by a woman named Daphne. She was the woman who was with Theo in a black car. Daphne finds out that he is Theo's father. She said that now was not the time to see him. Max still forced his way in and ignored her words. Max then went to look for Theo in the building. After they met, Theo was angry with him because he thought his mother's death was caused by him. Theo, who was disappointed, immediately ordered him to leave. Then Theo came to see Daphne. She tells Max she can get Theo to recognize him as his father again, but the condition is that he must join them. Hearing this, he wanted to join them. Then she takes him to her house because Theo lives there. On the other hand, Theo was seen in a field with Charlie. Then Charlie said that he should appreciate his father's efforts, who had escaped from prison, to meet him. He asked Theo to appreciate his father's efforts. Theo also replied that Charlie did not know what he was feeling. When his mother died, his father went to prison for decades for murdering people. Max finally arrived at Daphne's house. There, she told her that they are currently trying to find the Nitro Rush concoction, which is currently favored by drug addicts. She gets information that the makers of Nitro Rush are two scientists in the middle of an isolated forest. Daphne also said that if they managed to get the Nitro Rush concoction, they could become the richest people in the world. Not long after, Theo arrived at Daphne's house along with Charlie and Collis. Then Daphne came over to Theo, who was angry. She asked him to respect Max, because Max was willing to sacrifice for him and join them. Then she kissed Theo, finding that he was happy, because all this time he had liked her. When they gathered, Theo and Charlie immediately explained the path to the Nitro Rush concoction. Based on their observations, the two scientists stored the mixture in a flash drive that had a password, so the two of them couldn't open it remotely. They also said that the lab was in the middle of an isolated forest, and an alarm had been installed on the ground. So, if a stranger comes and sets foot on the land, they both know it immediately. Max immediately plans something to get into the lab without touching the ground. He tells Daphne that he needs a training ground to implement this plan. She agreed to it. The next morning, they started doing hanging exercises such as playing flying fox. Doing so allowed them to enter the lab without ever having to touch the ground. After that, Max asks Daphne to upgrade their car because their car doesn't have the power to go into an isolated forest. Then he took the car to Hubert's place to upgrade his car engine. While waiting for the car to work, they started shooting practice. After that, he invites Theo to drive Hubert's sports car. But their relationship, which had begun to improve, became worse again. Theo suddenly remembers his past when Max failed to take care of his mother. Max replied that what he thought was not true cause he was even willing to die for his mother. After that, Max advises Theo to not be too close with Daphne, because she was just fooling around with him and only using him. Theo, who heard this, didn't care and immediately left him. Without Max and Theo knowing, Collis was recording their conversation. He immediately sent the video to Avocat via his cell phone. Then he ordered Collis to keep an eye on them. When the night was late, Max could not sleep. Suddenly Daphne comes to meet him and teases him. She kept on teasing him to have sex because she thought he couldn't sleep thinking about it. Max immediately refused because he knew that his son had feelings for Daphne. Without them knowing, Theo was watching them through the CCTV monitor screen. This disappoints him because the woman he loves prefers to be close to his father. The following day, they were ready to go to the lab. But when they were about to leave, Collis seemed to be tasting the Nitro Rush liquid. Arriving in the forest, they decided to go without him and Charlie. They were assigned to look after the car. Meanwhile, Max, Theo, and Daphne went to the lab. On the other hand, the two scientists named Chemistic and Resin went out of the lab to look for breakfast. Meanwhile, Max immediately infiltrated the lab using a flying fox rope until he managed to get to the lab's roof. Unfortunately, when Theo started using the rope, his cell phone fell, and he immediately took it down. Because it is considered very dangerous, Max asks him to leave his cell phone. After they were in the lab, Theo immediately transferred the data from the scientist's computer to his flash drive. At the same time, Collis, whose emotions were out of control due to the nitrogen rush liquid, also took rash actions. He drives his car towards the lab to hit it. A confused Charlie immediately called Daphne and told her that Collis was driving the car and headed towards the lab. So, they immediately went to escape. Due to the carelessness of Collis's actions, the scientists knew that someone had infiltrated his lab. They both rushed back to the lab to catch the intruders. The car driven by Collis arrived at the lab. He also asked Daphne for the concoction. Not long after, the two scientists came and immediately attacked them with gunfire. Max immediately asked them all to get into the car. He immediately stepped on the gas and left the place. But the two scientists did not just give up. They immediately chased the car. With Max's ability to drive, he finally escaped from them. He drives the car to his father's house. Then the two scientists returned to the lab. When they got there, they were both shocked to learn that Max and his team had stolen their Nitro Rush liquid. Then accidentally, they found Theo's cell phone that had been dropped this afternoon, so that the two of them could track their whereabouts. Max and his team arrived at Meg's house. Collis immediately contacted Avocat via video call. He informs him that currently, the Nitro Rush concoction has been stolen. He asked Daphne to hand him the mix on a flash drive, but she refused. So, he felt annoyed and threatened to kill Theo if she didn't give him the Nitro Rush. But unexpectedly, Theo had changed his flash disk password without anyone knowing. Knowing this, Collis didn't kill Theo either. Then Avocat told him to kill Daphne because she was now useless to him. When he wanted to attack her, suddenly the scientists who managed to track their whereabouts came. The two of them immediately attacked Meg's house with rifles. Max immediately ducked down to save himself. He also counterattacked by hitting them. He immediately broke down the door from the inside and jumped at them. The two of them immediately attacked him when he fell and pushed him to the ground again. Daphne, who saw this, immediately went out of the house to help Max. She smacked one of the scientists in the face with her unarmed hand. Max, who managed to stand back up, immediately beat Resin until he couldn't fight back. Meanwhile, Daphne, who had attacked one of the scientists, was now cornered by being strangled by one of them. Luckily, when she falls, she finds a rifle to use against them. Just as Daphne is about to kill him with the gun, Max yells at her not to kill him. She followed his words, and she just shot the scientist in the leg so he couldn't escape. Daphne, who had been injured in the fight earlier, finally fell to the ground and fainted. Suddenly, the police came to Meg's house using a helicopter. The police immediately helped Daphne and arrested all the criminals. Max explained to Theo that all of this had been planned, starting from him who escaped from prison to being theft of the Nitro Rush concoction. This was done with the approval of the president of the police, where Max was imprisoned, because they said all that he had to do was for the benefit of the police and also to help Theo from the wrong way. Then Max asked Theo to hand over the flash drive to the police. But Theo said he had deleted the Nitro Rush recipe from the flash drive. It turned out that he had not copied and pasted the mixture onto his flash drive all this time. He had deleted it directly from the two scientists' computers while they were in the middle of the forest. This was done by Theo so that no one in this world would ever know about the Nitro Rush recipe. Then everything will be safe again. Long story short, Max returned to prison after a few days. After he arrived at the prison, the police director called him to come to her room. She informs Max that his family's identity has been exposed again. She also gives him the task of taking care of his family. He also agreed. The film ends. The moral we can learn is that no matter how bad our parents are, they are willing to die to take care of their family. But if he fails to take care of one of his family, it doesn't mean we have to hate him, because we don't know what struggles he has made to protect his family.